Part 2 of The Long Walk to Freedom. I worked hard at university, but I had fun too. I took up running, boxing, and ballroom dancing. One night, my friends and I snuck out to a dance hall. We thought we were very daring, until we met our teacher. But suddenly, my student days were cut short. I was elected to sit on the student council, but only 25 students had voted. Most did not vote because the council could not change the thing that concerned them the most, the bad canteen food. I told the principal that I would not sit on the council without the students' support. He was very angry and threatened to expel me, but I wouldn't change my mind. I never went back to university. Was I living up to the name of my troublemaker? Back at the Great Palace, Uncle Jongi soon had other plans for me and Justice. He told us we were to be married. He had already picked a wife for each of us. We were shocked. We didn't want to get married, so we decided to run away to Johannesburg. Johannesburg, it was over 700 kilometres away. It was known to all the people as Egoli, the place of gold. There we would find jobs and make new lives. It was an adventure, and we set off full of hope and excitement for the future towards the twinkling lights of the big city. The city was bigger than we could have ever imagined. Everywhere we looked there were people, shops and cars. But those smart shops and expensive cars belonged to white people. Most black people were poor. I went to live in the Alexandra township, just outside the city, where the tiny houses had no electricity or running water, and the roads were just dusty paths. Life was hard in Alexandra, but it became home to me. Justice stayed in Johannesburg for a while, but after a few years, Uncle Jongi died, and Justice returned to Eastern Cape to take over as chief. I met many new people, but one of my best friends was Walter. Walter and his family lived in Orlando West, Soweto, a black township near Johannesburg. I looked up to Walter. Like me, he was from Eastern Cape, but he had been in Johannesburg longer and knew a lot about the city's people and places. I spent a lot of time at the Cicelis' home. It was there I met Evelyn Mays, a young nurse and relative of the Cicelis'. We fell in love and got married. We had 2 sons and 2 daughters, but one daughter did not live long. Sadly, Evelyn and I soon parted, but I remained close to my sons, Thambekile and Magatho, and to my daughter, Makazawi. At the Cicelis, I also met my friend Oliver Tambo again. We were both studying law, and in 1952, we set up the first black law firm in South Africa. But there was another way that we could try and improve the lives of black people. Ever since white people had come to South Africa, they had ruled black people. My friend Walter was a member of the African National Congress, or ANC, which had been fighting for the freedom of black people to rule themselves. Oliver and I joined too, and at Walter's home we wondered how we could make the government take notice. In 1944, we formed the ANC Youth League and planned to get thousands of young black people to join. We would protest peacefully by marching through the streets and demanding our freedom. We would not be ignored. In 1948, the government started passing laws that introduced apartheid, which divided black and white people into separate groups. White people lived in suburbs, whilst black people lived in townships. The government also built separate schools, churches, and cinemas for black and white people. There were even separate entrances to post offices and shops. All black people over 16 years of age had to carry a passbook showing who they were and where we worked and lived. If we were found without our passbook, we would be thrown into prison. Apartheid was a cruel system. It classified every person in South Africa according to race, for example as black, coloured or white, and controlled the lives of those who were not white. It made me and my ANC comrades angry. In 1952, we led a protest called the Defiance Campaign, calling on black people to ignore the whites-only entrances in post offices, shops and trains. Over 250 people were arrested, but thousands joined in. The government did not stop its apartheid laws, but the ANC now had many more members. We were getting stronger. The government banned me from attending ANC meetings or protesting against apartheid, but I went on working for the ANC in secret. It was not only black people who were against apartheid. Thousands of coloured, Indian and white South Africans were against it too. And in the early 1950s, many of these different groups joined together to form the Congress Alliance. Then, in 1955, the ANC and the other members of the Congress Alliance met in Kliptown, near Johannesburg, to draw up the Freedom Charter. The meeting was called to the Congress of the People, and the Charter was a promise to fight for freedom and democracy for all South Africans. It began. The government did not like the Charter, arrested 156 Congress members, including Oliver, Walter and me. We were charged with planning to destroy the government. The trial lasted 4 long years, but in the end, we were found not guilty. During that time, I fell in love again. Winnie was a social worker and a member of the ANC. We got married in 1958 and had 2 daughters. In 1960, during our trial, a tragedy happened that shocked the world. In Sharpeville, near Johannesburg, 5,000 people marched to a police station to protest against having to carry passbooks. They were not armed, yet the police still fired guns at them. 69 people were killed and 400 were injured. After Sharpeville, the government banned the ANC and other organisations fighting for freedom. They did not want to share South Africa with black people. Our peaceful marches had not worked, but we were not giving up. We decided that the only way to get our freedom was to fight the government in the same way they were fighting us, with guns. The ANC formed an army which we called the Zizwe, which in our language means the spear of the nation. I was sent abroad on a secret mission to ask other countries to help us fight apartheid. I also went to train as a soldier. In 1962, I returned to South Africa using a false passport and calling myself David. I stayed in hiding for many months whilst the police searched everywhere for Nelson Mandela. Then, one day in August, I was stopped in my car and arrested. I was sentenced to 5 years in prison for leaving the country illegally and for enticing workers to strike. Later, the police also arrested a group of my comrades, including my old friend Walter. Just 9 months into my 5-year sentence, I was told I would stand trial again. We were all charged with planning to overthrow the government. If we were found guilty, we could be sentenced to death. The trial began in October 1963, and in April 1964 I spoke in defence for us all. I told the court that the ANC was a peaceful organisation, but the government had banned it. We had no peaceful way to protest. We had been imprisoned and even killed, and this is why we had to fight back with guns. I said I have cherished the idea of democracy in which all peoples live together in harmony. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. 8 of us were found guilty, but we were not sentenced to death. Instead, we were told we would spend the rest of our lives in prison. Life in prison? Would I ever see my wife, mother and children again? We were taken to Robben Island, a prison off the coast of Cape Town, all except for our comrade Dennis. Of all 8 of us, he was the only white person and had to serve his sentence at a different prison. On Robben Island, my cell was so tiny that when I lay down on my sleeping mat, my feet and hands would touch opposite walls. I was given the same thin blankets and a bucket for a toilet. The cell was to be my home. I tried to stay hopeful, but it wasn't easy. At first, we were only allowed 2 visitors a year and just 2 letters. Before we were given them, the letters would be read by a prison guard who blacked out anything he thought that we shouldn't know about. Twice I received bad news from home. First, I was told my mother had died. Then my eldest son was killed in a car crash. When I got that news, I spent the whole day in my cell thinking about him and the rest of my family. It was one of the saddest days of my life. We were not allowed radios or newspapers. Weeks, months, years went by without us knowing what was happening in the world. One day, I saw that the warder had left his newspaper lying on a chair. It was too tempting. I grabbed the paper and began reading it. I was caught and locked in a room for 3 days with no food and only rice water to drink as punishment. Slowly the years passed. 5 years, 10, 20. I no longer needed ash to make my hair grey, but outside the prison, the fight for freedom went on. Even though the ANC was banned in South Africa, it continued outside the country. Oliver Tambo was living abroad and was now ANC president. Many governments around the world began to support us. In the 1980s, the ANC launched the Release Mandela campaign, asking people all over the world to put pressure on the South African government to release me and my fellow prisoners and to allow the ANC back in. Thousands of people signed the petition. Then in March 1982, Walter and a few other prisoners and I were moved to Pollsmoor Prison near Cape Town. Was this a sign that things were beginning to change? Should I dare hope that our struggle for freedom was coming to an end? The government and I began secret talks about peace.